Hi everyone, welcome back to the Shamrock Quilt Studio. It's Memorial Day weekend when I'm filming this, and I'm taking a little bit of break to get some sewing done. I'm working on Barnstar, and as we discussed in our last video, we are going to put a sashing between the blocks, the 16-inch blocks that we're using. So join me right after this little break and we'll get started with that. And welcome back to the Shamrock Quilt Studio. Hi and welcome back. Now, what we decided to do was put a sashing between the blocks, the 16-inch blocks that are around the main block. And the main block is this diamond star I have here. I really need to get it hung back up. But for right now, we're just going to leave it down. I cut some strips from my original background fabric, and that's the one that I've been using, not the new purchased. And I've kept those separate, and I've marked this one with the receipt and a little note when I bought it, what it's for, how much is there, and how much it cost, how much it was per yard. So I know this is the second purchase, and this is the original purchase. And I wanted to keep them separate so I know when I swap the fabrics, at least I know what I'm swapping, if that makes sense. And if we can get it all from the original purchase, that's great. I just have a feeling we're not going to be able to do that. But for the fabric we're using for the sashing on those smaller blocks, I cut 8 strips of 2-inch fabric from the original fabric. And that's going to give me a 1.5-inch sashing between these blocks. And I know I can get 2 from each strip, and so that's why I cut 8. Is that right? I think that's right. So I've got all these, and then I've got a couple of them pinned. And I think I'm going to move this so you can see a little bit better what we're doing. So we're just going to kind of roll that together and put it off here. I think it'll stay there. Okay, I started first on the tulip block. I've got 3 pinned and 1 I'm going to show you. So we're going to stitch those today, and then the rest of them are going to be just the same. What I did first of all is I took each of these blocks, and they're not perfectly square. There are sometimes when you make subunits or units that go into blocks that you make them and then you trim them to size and you know they're right on. But when you're making a block like this, unless you're going to trim every single section that you sew together, there's a good possibility that when you get it all together, it's not going to be exactly square, and some are going to be a little more challenging than others. This tulip block is one of the ones that's going to be a little more challenging because, and here's a great example, this corner. This little one section here with these 3 pieces of fabric, it's a little smaller than probably it should be. So that means that this piece of fabric is a little shorter than this piece. So somehow we need to bridge that gap. So the first thing that I would do is I would kind of stretch it to see if we stretched it a bit, does that help? And it does in almost all of these cases. We don't want to stretch it too much, obviously, because then that would tend to make it misshapen. But we do want it to be big enough. And we can't trim it down so that it matches, because if we start trimming for that one little area, we're going to cut off points, and we don't want to do that. So I cut off the highs so that if we had a section like here in the middle, and let me pull this over here in the middle, this section tended to bow out a little bit. So I would take a ruler a straight edge. And look at how this is coming together. And I'm not only looking at the edge, I'm looking at the pattern of fabric in between to see how it is playing together. That would be a good term for it. So I can see that these green pieces here, they line up. The other side here is, this one's a little bit shorter, so it's probably that it's not pulled out all the way when it was pressed. So I can see that we had some issues with pressing and with the pieces not being quite the right size, or the seam was a little bit off. But what we want to do is we want to just kind of look at the overall shape and see, I can see there's a little bit of a bow there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push it out just a little bit further than where I think it should be. And then I'm going to take my rotary cutter, and this is kind of backwards, so bear with me. Can you see it here? I think you can. And we're just cutting off, we're cutting through some seams, so that makes it, okay. Well, this one didn't cut. That was really sloppy on the trimming too, sorry. Okay, so now we've kind of trimmed that up a little bit. It's still not quite straight or square, but it's a little bit closer. So then what we're going to do in the next step is to kind of work on remedying that. And I took this strip, I cut it 17 inches. This is supposed to be a 16-inch square. In reality, it's about, well, it should be 16 and a half, so you got it. It's really about 16 and a quarter. So we know that when we do it, we need to pull it out. But I did a 17-inch, so we would have a little bit of room to spare on the end of these. Okay, so then I folded in the middle and marked the middle of this and marked the middle of the block. And I marked the middle by the middle of these two pieces because they are fairly straight, and that would represent the middle of the block. I pinned that in place, and then I'm just going to look at where are we sitting. Right now we're pretty even, and it's about 1/4 of an inch on each side. So that's really good. That's great as far as some of these blocks and how off they are. And I'll tell you something too, if you have these and you're moving them around, or you're, like we did last week, we kind of played with them and put them in place, they could tend to get a little misshapen from that as well. Okay, so we're just going to start from the middle, and we're going to give this a gentle little pull to make sure that it's performing at its optimal ability. Let's put it that way. And then this one here looks pretty good as far as the length. So we're just going to pin it in place, just straightening it a bit. But then we get to this last block here. That seam is a little short. So what we're going to do is we're going to pin that here, just so we can be aware of that. And then just put a regular pin in here. And we might put one, I don't like those. We might put one here just to hold it down. And see, we're within 1/4 of an inch that side. And the same with this one. Now this one, the seam goes up a little bit. So we're going to correct that. We're going to take that seam there and pull it back in place. That's another one of those short pins. One day I'm going to pull them all out and throw them away. Okay. And then let's get to the next one. So we're just going to give it a little tug because it's in pretty good shape. It's where it should be. And then we're just gonna kind of correct this way this is laying. It's wide enough, it's just a little crooked. Okay, and one more pin and we should be done. Oops, that's one of those short ones too. Okay, so we've done this with all four of one side of the tulip block. You only want to do one side of all your blocks, and that will be the side that you join to the next block. I've got my 1/4" foot on my machine. Change the setting to 1/4 inch, and we're going to make it 2.4. Move it a little bit closer to me. And this should be just easy, straight sewing right down. Okay, so we're taking our pins out and we want to check how that seam did. So we're going to open it up. A couple of things we want to check on. Do we have any folds or creases in our seam? Our answer is no. Did we cut off any points? And the answer is yes, we did. We had 4 points here. 3 of them came out great. We had a 4th one that did not. And when I look at that particular point, there is no way we could have caught that and not cut it off. The point on the original sewing for that was so far over, there was no seam allowance on the outside. So there's really not a way to fix that. And we're just going to have to accept that the way it is. Okay, and you'll notice that this, you notice the stretch there in that fabric. So it does have a stretch. So what we will do is we will continue this for all of our 16 blocks. We've got all of the tulip star done. Then we're going to give them a really good press, and we'll lay them down and see what order we want to put them in, because we're going to have one block in all the corners followed by the 3 other blocks and then the other corner. And we're going to sew it together so that all 5 blocks are on top. That would be the 4 plus the other one that's in the corner. And the same thing for the bottom. And then on the sides, we'll have 3 and 3. And those will all be sewn together, ready to put together in a complete frame, but we're not sewing the frame on yet. We're going to start at that point building the big block, Diamond Star, out so it's large enough then to add those other pieces on. I think that's going to be the easiest way to get our sizing correct. And once I have all the sashing together, I can make a final check of measurements to see how big that border needs to be between Diamond Star and the outside blocks, and then determine how big we want the colored section or the printed section of the border to be in relation to the white fabric, and we will go from there. This has been pretty simple block, pretty simple technique that we're talking about today. Little bit about error correction. You don't want to pull too much, but you do want to get to a point where they're consistent in size, because the next step is going to be sewing these blocks together. And you're going to have to take a block that is completely unmatched. Now this one's exactly the same block, but you're going to have to sew it to the other side. And what I'm going to do in addition to what I have done is I'm going to take my marker that the ink disappears in and draw a line up here where my fabric is. I may even draw, depending on what block I'm matching, the center point so that I can make sure we're getting center to center, and maybe some other things that we wanted to match up. If we have blocks that we have seams that should match up, those I'll pay attention to. If they shouldn't match, that's not a big deal. But we want to keep them consistent. We want to make sure that we sew them together like little soldiers coming together and they're all lined up perfectly. We don't want to sew the next block up to the top of the sashing. We want to keep it right at the same distance. And the way to do that is you start in the middle and you pin out. I've got 15 more of these to do, and right now the sun is out, so I'm going to enjoy a little bit of the weekend and work on this throughout the week so we can work on putting the borders on the center block next. Thanks so much for joining me today. I know that we've kind of slowed down a bit our pace of this block, but I think that in the next week or two, we're really going to see some progress as far as building little pieces into bigger pieces into our biggest piece and seeing that whole quilt top. And I'm trying to work in my mind how I'm going to be able to display that quilt top so you can see the whole thing. So if you've got any great ideas, be sure to share them with me. I think I have one that might work, so I'm working on that. If you like this video, give us a thumbs up. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing, and be sure to share this with a friend who might be interested in doing this Barnstar project, or a friend that just likes quilting or just likes to see a little bit of quilting and learn a little bit more about how some of these things are done. It's been a pleasure today. I hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next week at the Shamrock Quilt Studio.